Imagine a small desert city becoming the birthplace of one of the world's major religions, transforming not just hearts, but entire empires. This is the story of Islam, from revelation in Mecca to a rapidly expanding civilization. Let's explore how Islam began, its roots in the 7th century Arabia, the revelations to the Prophet Muhammad, and how those teachings laid the groundwork for a global movement. Whether you're curious, studying, or just love history, this is your crash course in Islam's early story. The world before Islam. To understand how Islam began, we need to step back, not just to Mecca, but to what Arabia looked like in the 6th and early 7th centuries. At the time, the Arabian Peninsula was a mosaic of tribal societies. Most people lived in small, kin-based groups. They were fiercely loyal to their clans. There were no centralized governments. There was no unified legal system. The tribal code, honor, hospitality, and revenge, ruled daily life. Religiously, Arabia was diverse. Many practiced polytheism, worshipping various deities. Mecca itself was home to the Kaaba, a cube-shaped structure that housed idols from multiple tribes and served as a major pilgrimage site. But there were also Jewish communities, especially in Yathrib, later Medina, and Christian groups scattered across the region. Some Arabs, called Hanifs, rejected idol worship and believed in one God, though they weren't aligned with any organized religion. Economically, Mecca was thriving. It sat on a lucrative trade route linking Yemen to the Levant. The Quraysh tribe, which controlled Mecca, grew wealthy as merchants and custodians of the Kaaba. They had power, prestige, and a strong interest in preserving the status quo. Politically, Arabia was squeezed between two giants, the Byzantine Empire to the northwest and the Sasanian Persian Empire to the northeast. These empires were constantly at odds, draining each other's resources in near constant conflict. Arabia, largely overlooked by both, was rough and tribal, but strategically placed. And it was within this tribal patchwork, a place of storytellers, traders, and fierce loyalties, that a man named Muhammad was born around the year 570 CE. Muhammad was born into the Quraysh tribe, but was orphaned at a young age. Raised by his grandfather and later his uncle, he worked as a merchant and earned a reputation for honesty. Locals called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. In his 20s, he married a wealthy businesswoman named Khadija, who was 15 years older. She was his supporter, his closest confidant, and the first believer in his message. By age 40, Muhammad was retreating regularly to a cave outside Mecca to reflect. One night, during the holy month of Ramadan, something extraordinary happened. He received a revelation. The angel Gabriel, commanded him to recite. These revelations would continue for the next 23 years, eventually forming the Quran. At first, Muhammad shared these messages quietly, but as they became more public, calling for monotheism, social justice, care for the poor, and the equality of all under one God, he ran into trouble. The Quraysh saw his message as a threat to their religious authority, their economic power, and their way of life. The ridicule turned to persecution. But the movement was growing, and so began one of history's most remarkable and most misunderstood transformations: the Prophet's mission and the birth of a community. As Muhammad's message grew louder, the resistance grew stronger. The Quraysh elite mocked him, called him a liar, and began actively persecuting his followers. Some were tortured, others fled, yet despite this pressure, Muhammad continued to preach. He spoke of one God, Allah. He condemned economic injustice, idol worship, and the mistreatment of the vulnerable. The message struck a chord with the marginalized. Slaves, the poor, and women were among the earliest converts. Why? Because Islam's core idea, that all humans are equal in the eyes of God, was radical. It challenged a deeply hierarchical society. It promised dignity where none had existed before. But the persecution became unbearable. In 622 CE, Muhammad and his followers made a dramatic move. They emigrated from Mecca to Yathrib, a city to the north. This journey, called the Hijra, was more than a relocation. It marked the beginning of the Islamic calendar. Yathrib was soon renamed Medina, the city of the Prophet, and it became the first truly Muslim community. There, things changed. Muhammad was no longer just a preacher. He was a statesman, a judge, and a community leader. He brokered peace between feuding tribes and drafted the Constitution of Medina, an agreement among Muslims, Jews, and pagan tribes to form a pluralistic city-state, united in mutual protection. This document is one of the earliest known examples of a written constitution. It outlined rights, responsibilities, and religious freedoms. Islam, from the start, was both spiritual and political, not in the sense of modern government, but in its understanding that faith and daily life were intertwined. Still, Mecca loomed. Tensions escalated. Raids occurred between the two cities, and battles soon followed. At Badr in 624 CE, Muhammad's small force miraculously defeated a much larger Meccan army. It was a turning point, a sort of validation. The Muslims saw it as a divine favor. 2 years later, at the Battle of Uhud, they suffered a defeat. And in 627 CE, the Battle of the Trench saw Medina successfully repel a siege, further cementing its strength. Muhammad continued to grow the community through diplomacy and, at times, through arms. He sent letters to surrounding tribes and rulers, inviting them to Islam, not with threats, but with clarity and dignity. Some accepted and others rejected, but the momentum was undeniable. In 630 CE, Mecca surrendered. Muhammad entered the city not with vengeance, but with forgiveness. He ordered the destruction of the idols inside the Kaaba, but spared the lives of those who had once persecuted him. His return wasn't a conquest as much as it was a reconciliation. By the time of his death in 632 CE, most of the Arabian Peninsula had accepted Islam, yet the story was only beginning. What started with a whisper in a cave had now become a community, a constitution, and a mission. The caliphs and the expansion of the empire. After Muhammad's death, the question of leadership arose. Who would guide this new community? Muhammad had not named a successor explicitly, but his close companion and father-in-law, Abu Bakr, was chosen as the first caliph, meaning successor. His leadership marked the start of the Rashidun Caliphate, a 30-year period led by the first four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, known as the rightly guided in Islamic tradition. Under their rule, Islam transformed from a regional faith into a rapidly expanding empire. But this wasn't just about religious conversion. It was about governance, diplomacy, and yes, military campaigns. Within decades, Islamic rule stretched across vast lands: Syria, Egypt, Persia, and parts of North Africa. Cities like Damascus and Kufa became administrative hubs. The Sasanian Empire collapsed. The Byzantine Empire lost much of its eastern territory. How did this happen so fast? Partly because the regions they conquered were already exhausted. The endless wars between the Byzantines and the Persians had left populations disillusioned and overtaxed. Many local communities, especially Christians persecuted by other Christian sects, welcomed the Muslims as liberators. Islamic rule brought something new: religious tolerance. Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians were allowed to practice their faith under zimmi status, protected but taxed. It wasn't perfect, but for the 7th century, this was revolutionary. The Quran specifically protected the people of the book, and in many places, interfaith communities flourished under Islamic governance. Administratively, the caliphs were savvy. They kept many local officials in place, preserved key institutions, and implemented a tax system based on Islamic principles but adapted to regional customs. And very importantly, they emphasized learning. By the time of the Umayyad Caliphate, 661 to 750 CE, the Islamic Empire stretched from Spain to Central Asia, one of the largest empires in world history. It unified the region with a common language, Arabic, and built roads, postal systems, and architectural marvels. This growth wasn't mere expansion, it was statecraft, but it wasn't without growing pains. Tensions arose, particularly over who should lead. Should the caliph be chosen by consensus or be from the Prophet's family? This question would eventually split the Muslim world into Sunni and Shia branches, a divide that remains today. Despite internal disputes, Islam continued to thrive and adapt, including not only Arabs but also Persians, Berbers, Turks, and more. Islam's message had transcended ethnicity, becoming a global civilization rooted in faith, law, and an ever-expanding hunger for knowledge. This leads us to the next great chapter, a flowering of learning that would change the world. A civilization emerges. The story of Islam is not just one of conquest, it's also one of creation, resilience, and the flowering of human thought on a global scale. By the 8th and 9th centuries, the Islamic world was entering what historians now call its golden age. The vast Islamic empire stretched from Spain in the west to India in the east, encompassing diverse peoples, languages, and traditions. But rather than suppress this diversity, Islam created space for it to thrive. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, which came to power in 750 CE after overthrowing the Umayyads, the capital moved to Baghdad, and with it came a new focus: knowledge. The House of Wisdom, established in Baghdad in the early 9th century, wasn't just a library, it was a beacon. Scholars from every corner of the empire, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, and more, gathered there to translate, preserve, and expand upon the knowledge of the ancient world. Works by Plato, Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy were translated into Arabic. But this wasn't simply copying. Muslim scholars challenged ideas, corrected errors, and developed new theories. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi introduced what we now know as algebra. The term algebra itself comes from his writings. His works would later travel into Europe and become foundational in modern mathematics. The Persian polymath Avicenna wrote the Canon of Medicine, a textbook used in European medical schools for centuries. Averroes, a philosopher from Islamic Spain, reintroduced Aristotle to the West, deeply influencing Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. And then there's the infrastructure. Cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, and Samarkand became hubs of urban development, adorned with mosques, markets, universities, and public baths. Trade routes linked the Islamic world with China, sub-Saharan Africa, and Northern Europe. Arabic became a language of science, law, theology, and poetry, spanning borders and binding communities together. Importantly, this intellectual movement wasn't limited to elites. The Quran, with its emphasis on reading, reflection, and inquiry, encouraged literacy and learning for everyday people. In a world where many societies reserved knowledge for the few, Islamic civilization promoted it for the many. Religiously, Islam offered a unifying moral code that tied diverse cultures together. The 5 pillars of Islam, faith, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage, provided both a personal compass and a communal rhythm. The annual pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, became not just a religious act, but a cultural connector, bringing Muslims of all backgrounds together in a shared experience. And despite its vast reach, the Islamic world showed remarkable tolerance for its time. Jews and Christians, known as people of the book, were protected under Islamic law and allowed to worship freely in exchange for a special tax called the jizya. In many cases, Jewish communities in the Islamic world enjoyed more religious freedom than their counterparts in Christian Europe. Still, the story wasn't always perfect. There were power struggles. Dynasties rose and fell, and political assassinations, revolts, and regional tensions did exist. The Sunni-Shia divide deepened, and sectarian conflict flared. Over time, colonialism, internal stagnation, and external invasions would take their toll on this once global power. But the brilliance of what emerged, the civilization that began with a solitary voice in a cave, remains undeniable. And it's all too easy to forget just how unlikely it all was. Muhammad had no army when he began. He had no wealth, no empire, no throne. He began with a message that there is one God, that all humans are equal before him, and that faith must be lived through compassion, justice, and community. From that message grew a civilization that revolutionized the sciences, shaped the modern world, and today guides the spiritual lives of over 1.9 billion people. But perhaps the most powerful part of Islam's origin story isn't just the scale of what it achieved. It's how it began, with a man alone in a cave, listening and trying to make sense of the world. This reminds us that history is not only written by empires and kings, but also by those who hear something true and choose to follow it. So, the next time you see the word Islam in a headline, remember this deeper story. Remember the people who preserved knowledge when others were burning it. Remember the trade routes, the books, the poets, the prayers. Remember that before there was an empire, there was an idea, and that idea continues to move, evolve, and inspire. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Islam's rise in the world, check out our book, Sasanian Empire, a captivating guide to the Neo-Persian Empire that ruled before the Arab conquest of Persia and the rise of Islam. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.